60 years ago today, on November 22nd, 1963, our nation and the world was rocked by the assassination of our president, John F. Kennedy. This single event has resulted in countless books, movies, documentaries, the Warren Commission, a separate congressional committee, thousands of websites and blogs, and globally enduring speculation and analysis. Perhaps no other single event has ever resulted in such attention and investigation. Yet we still have reason to question the official findings of the government. The Warren Commission findings have come under attack on many fronts, with the public clamoring for the truth about what really happened that day in Dallas. Experts have analyzed the evidence and found shortcomings in the Warren Commission report. A subsequent congressional committee determined that much of the Warren Commission report was valid, but agreed that a conspiracy must have existed. In other words, Oswald was not a lone actor. Today, 60 years after this national tragedy, we still find ourselves as a nation searching for the whole truth. At Gold Shields, we take this opportunity on this day of remembrance to have an expert panel of investigators discuss that day's events, the evidence, and the many unanswered questions. Welcome back to a special edition of Gold Shields. This is Dan Murphy, and along with my partner in crime, Tom Smith. This week we have a special show, and he'll introduce our guests in a second, but we're going to take advantage of an opportunity today to speak to some experts about the JFK assassination. And not the conspiracies, not the Oliver Stone movie, but through the eyes of investigators and detectives and people who, if they had been there that day, what would they have done, etc. This case has reverberated for 6 decades now, and it will continue on. Much has been said, much has been written, and we are just going to tap into a little bit of it today. And you might be surprised at some of the stuff you hear, and I think that's good. Tom, we are so lucky and blessed to have our two guests today. Please introduce our two wonderful guests.
You know what? This is great, and for all our audience out there, this is gonna be a little different. This isn't so much of an interview as it is a open discussion on a fascinating case that gripped me as a kid. I mean, I remember being young, 8, 9 years old, and getting reading about it and getting so attached to it. And this is going to be a great episode. And we have two of the best out there. One is actually a returning guest, and one is going to be a guest. And they are two experts in their field. Sheryl McCollum is the Obi-Wan of our field. I mean, she is. Let's be real. Uh, a absolute expert in cold cases and investigations and crime scenes, and the host of the ever popular Zone 7 podcast, which Dan and I were lucky enough to be on. And Sheryl is a dear friend, and so honored to have her here, along with Steve Monteiro, who is the host of his own great show, the Steve Monteiro Report, 20 plus year Secret Service agent, author, the best of what he does. And we're so honored to have them both here to have this discussion. So, Steve, Sheryl, how are you?
Very good.
I could not be better.
Yeah.
I am thrilled to be with the three of y'all. You have no idea. Such an honor.
Well, it's good to
Well,
be
we did-
back. So it's just great to be back on your show. So thank you for
Thank
the
you.
invite.
Well, thank you so much, both. And you know what? Without further ado, why don't we jump into the case? It was November 22nd, 1963, a day that anyone who was alive, and I was a year old, but even in looking back in history, it's a day that sticks out to you. President John F. Kennedy, the 35th president of the United States, was visiting Dallas in a state that was not decidedly for him in the 1960 election. But nonetheless, he was wooing them and winning them over. He was a very popular president. During a motorcade, he is traveling with open top. He wants to connect with the public. He wants them to see him. He wants to relate to them. It's very important to him. He is shot in Dealey Plaza, and we'll talk about that later. Those of us that have been there have a different perspective maybe than those who have just seen the videos. He's shot several times. Governor Connolly of Texas, one of those rounds also goes into him. He is transported to Parkland Hospital, where he is pronounced dead sometime later. And there is where the story starts, right? Anybody who's ever studied this case has their opinions on conspiracies, etc. But let's talk today about the mechanics of what went down. Steve Monteiro is a retired Secret Service agent. We talked offline a little bit about how the Secret Service was impacted by that day, but their role that day versus Dallas PD versus FBI, there's a lot going on, right, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to, on a personal note, I had mentioned this off camera that I was 10 years old when this happened. I was in school, and I just have an absolute vivid memory of that particular day and how devastating it was. And I remember being in the classroom when someone came in to get the teacher and they ran out. Of course, we didn't know what was going on. And then the teacher came back in probably about 10 minutes later, just covering her face with her hands and just crying uncontrollably, almost hysterically. Just she was just so upset, and we didn't know what had happened. And eventually, she calmed down, and we were able to find out that the president had been shot and was killed. And they sent everyone home from school that day, and it was just such a somber time in our nation's history. And I just remember grown adults just crying, and it was all over the news, and people came out on the street to discuss it, and people were running over to people's homes. It was just that kind of impactful event. Obviously, the death of the president, a young president, um, happening this way. And as I mentioned, it was first assassination that happened on television. So this was something that the American people were not used to seeing. They didn't see graphic things on the news. And here, the president of the United States was assassinated in a motorcade that was televised. And I just have such vivid memories of that. And it was a very difficult and tough time.
So, Sheryl, we're going to talk today, and one of the things I really want to talk about, rather than get into, like I said, get into the conspiracy and Oswald's history and all that stuff, let's talk about the crime scene, the scene itself in Dealey Plaza. Tom and I both have been there, and I'm not sure, Steve,
Yeah, I've been there.
Sheryl, if you have.
I have.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so we have a different perspective, don't we? It is not what you think it is, isn't it?
I would agree with that. Yes.
I think it's
And
much smaller than it looks on TV, doesn't it?
much smaller, much smaller. And in the field of vision for that target area is not only more narrow than you think, the succession of shots would have taken much quicker time than you would have thought too. Because you've got a moving target. I mean, that vehicle never stopped, but I want to go a little bit just before the shooting if I can.
Certainly.
I think it is imperative that we recognize the fact that Miss Kennedy and Miss Connolly were not a deterrent. That tells you something about that shooter because you would think typically Miss Kennedy didn't travel with him. Well, when she made the decision at the last minute to go with him and she's in that vehicle next to him, that's a different event for me than it would have been if you want to shoot a man, going into a building or coming out of a building. This is in front of children. This is in front of other women. This is in front of everybody that wanted to be in that town. It's like a parade. Legitimately, it's a parade. But to me, more importantly, those two women literally being in the field of danger is critical to me.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think Mrs. Kennedy decided to go at the breakfast, right? I don't think she was slated to be in the car until they were at the breakfast before the motorcade started. Uh, and it's just, Dan, you brought up Dealey Plaza and you hit on it correctly, and Cheryl and Steve also. It's so small. It's such a smaller area than you see on TV. And like Cheryl said, the succession of shots had to be right on top of each other. Uh, and then what I took out of Dealey Plaza was being on the one side of the street opposite the grassy knoll, and the amount of people who ran up that direction right after that last shot, you now understand when you're there because of how small it is. You see it on TV and you see people moving towards that area and you heard the reports about it. But when you're standing there, now you understand why or how everyone could react to running there because it's literally on top of you.
Well, if you think about that, go ahead, Steve,
Yeah,
please.
no, I was just going to make a reference to what you said earlier about the Secret Service and their role on that particular day. Um, there's always a battle between having the president exposed and then keeping him safe, and that's a constant battle that goes on. Because in this country, we want to have access to our leaders. We want to have access to our politicians. We don't want them to be hidden away and buried behind some fence or something. So there's always that battle and that desire to keep him safe, but yet expose him to the public. And that's certainly what happened that day, because there was obviously we had protective measures that could have saved him with the bubble on the car, but the president didn't want it that particular day. He wanted to be exposed, and that's one of the battles that we have. And I'll get to that maybe a little bit later on because I've had some personal battles along that line between keeping the president safe and then exposing him to the public. So, but on that particular day, they did have a choice to use that bubble, and the president decided he didn't want to do that. I don't know how much of a battle that was, and whether or not they were able to articulate that. Hey, they had some credible threats, or there was some concern. Because generally, when you go to the president and you say, we want to change this for this reason, you really need to have a good reason to do it. And you need to make a sort of a credible argument. So I don't know specifically what the argument was that day, but obviously they decided to go with an open car, and that was problematic because there was no protection against snipers.
And it sounds like it was based upon what I've read. It was JFK's decision to be open, exposed, and be accessible to the people. He's a man of the people. He liked to shake hands and talk to the crowd a little bit. And the people, you can tell, clearly were enamored with him when they saw him in person. He had built up. The media had helped him build up this persona. He and Jackie, the Camelot, the new day in America. This young couple, good-looking president, beautiful wife, beautiful children. All this opportunity ahead of us as a country, and people wanted to be a part of that. Back to our friend Mr. Oswald, really quickly. When you go to Dealey Plaza, you've been there. You know that the turn onto Elm Street is a 130, I think, degree turn. It's a really, really it's a tough turn. You have to slow down a lot to make that turn. And they were already going reasonably slow because Secret Service was standing on the car behind him on the running boards, Clint Hill and the rest of them. They couldn't go fast if you're doing that. That's dangerous, but they're going very slow. It creates an opportunity for someone who's an experienced rifle person. Um, you don't have to be a sniper per se, but that could have been a very tough shot. That it really was in many ways the perfect mix, wasn't it? I mean, a beautiful day, bright open. He's got the perch on the sixth floor, um, got the visibility, got the slow running car, and the rest is history. It's amazing how much work, probably in my opinion, from his perspective, went into all the thought of that, all the planning of that. You don't just wake up that morning and say, "I'm going to take my rifle and see if I can get a shot at him." You know,
And another thing, everybody in that building left because they wanted to be as close to the president and his wife as they could. So he was free to move around, to get the rifle out, to get in position, to, stick it out the window and wait. Nobody was coming by. So that was another thing that just happened to fall in his lap, so to speak, because
Sure.
everybody wanted to leave.
But the other factor is, how calm he had to be in order to make those shots. I mean, just think about. I mean, we've all handled weapons all our whole lives, and you go to the range and you go through these practical exercises, and you get nervous even doing that. I can only imagine, the calmness that he had to bring to that in order to get off those shots, um, which is kind of stunning to me.
Yep, with
And
a
that's going back to
No,
what
go
I
ahead,
was
Cheryl.
saying earlier. I'm sorry. That's kind of going back to what I was saying earlier. He had already flipped that switch. Today was the day he was going to do it. And the fact that Mrs. Kennedy was next to him didn't matter. Yep.
And, like you said, the precision of it, usually, by expert testimony and reading and all that, your first shot's going to be your best because it's the first one. And now your adrenaline is going to get jacked up as it goes on. And it ends up that, the second and third shot, or maybe if there was a fourth, we'll get into that later, were actually the best shots. There was one of the theories that the first shot actually missed everything because, like every criminal, take it for what it is. Criminals don't count on surveillance cameras being around lobbies of buildings or on the street corner when they commit a crime. Well, none of these people, no one counted on the Zapruder film being what it was. And what you think of that man at that time shooting that film and not, I mean, think about it. He knows what's going on. Abraham Zapruder knows what he's watching and doesn't take that camera off the motorcade. I mean, that's insane. Whether it was kind of a shock, situation that he was in, he just kind of froze and just his body functions kind of just took over. But an amazing piece of history that, is defined what it is. But when you watch it and you hear what you think is the first shot and you kind of see everyone look around that it might have missed, and then just the progression of the shots after that are just unbelievable footage.
Yeah, it is quite amazing, and I think that back in 1963 and until this day, it's difficult for people to accept that this milk toast type of person, this Lee Harvey Oswald, could have taken out the most powerful person in the world, most powerful country in the world, the commander in chief of the most powerful military in the world, with a rifle that he paid $19.95 from a sporting goods store. I mean, how could that happen? So I think that lended itself to a lot of questions being posed, and they're still being posed today because people still have a difficult time in thinking that that could possibly have happened. But if you take a look at history, we've had 4 U.S. presidents that have been assassinated, and they've all been assassinated by lone gunmen. So it's not something that has not happened. So it has happened. But in this particular case, I just think it was, the president of the United States just killed by this guy. It has to be more to this story. It has to be. He just can't do it by himself. So here we are, 60 years later, still debating all of the issues in the case. But yeah, it's quite remarkable when you think about it.
And if you look at it real deep, I mean, all of them, the lone gunmen, yes, but all their weapons have been cheap.
Yeah.
You're right.
Every one of
Yeah.
them, you know? And I think that's something that maybe people need to concentrate on too, because look what happened at 9/11.
Sure.
Box cutters, and they used our
Box
stuff.
cutters and knives. Yeah, absolutely. So
So it's that
yeah,
the lowest common denominator is sometimes the easiest way to do it.
sure.
We had a guy that escaped from a prison in Atlanta because he walked out the front
Yeah,
door because it was the door they left unlocked.
sure. But it is
I mean,
quite amazing because
it is.
I think people still have difficulty in accepting that. They just think, and of course, when Jack Ruby killed Oswald, that even this is a cover up. There's a lot more to this thing. So yeah,
And that was
that
live
was
on
live on
TV. I
television.
mean,
Yeah,
that was in real
yeah,
time.
yeah. It
Yeah.
was crazy.
That was the first homicide caught on live TV ever.
Mm-hmm. Ever. And that's when they said, hey, we need that little hesitation. We need 2 or 3 seconds. That's when that happened.
Yeah,
They said, we've got to have some type of
yeah. No one
delay.
was expecting. Certainly, no one was expecting that.
No.
They're in the police station in the garage, and that had happened. Yeah, very. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So let me ask you two guys. Let me ask you this: at what point, okay, with everything that happened, the assassination, the interviews, the weird press conferences with Oswald there, which are bizarre. At that time, here's a guy who might have just killed the president. They're having a press conference with him there, to him being killed. What was the point during all that either one of you can answer, whoever goes first. What information or what point did you go, wait a minute, this is odd? Like, there's got to be, like Steve just said, there's got to be something more to this. And that's what piqued your interest to read another book about it or watch a documentary on it. What was that factor that kind of got you to being more interested in getting more facts of the case?
I could tell you exactly what it was for me, and I've got to go back to the Zapruder film when Mrs. Kennedy is literally trying to crawl out of that limousine to get him help. And Clint Hill is running and catches up with the car and pushes Mrs. Kennedy down and covers her with his body. Now, before that, I mean, all of us have heard, oh, the Secret Service will get in between whoever they're protecting in a bullet. And people are like, oh, that can't be true. Who would sign up for that? Right. But then when you're watching it and you're like, here is this wife that is so panicked that she is literally trying to crawl out of a moving car. And then here comes this man. So for me at that point, I wanted to know everything about it.
For me, in terms of thinking that there was something more, it's when Oswald was being taken from one room to another, and there was a gaggle of press around him, and they were firing questions, and he said, "I'm just a patsy." So when he made that comment, "I'm just a patsy," that kind of, well, maybe there is some more to this, um, because crazed lone gunmen, they don't usually want to push this off on somebody else. I mean, whether it's Hinckley or whatever, this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to catch that fame or whatever it was that motivated them. They don't want to usually pass this off to somebody else because this is their moment, right? This is what they want to do. So when that was uttered, I was just like, okay, wait a minute, maybe there is more to this story than just some crazy lone gunman doing this, because that was his statement. "I'm just a patsy."
What about you, Danny?
The other, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
I'm
Cheryl,
sorry.
please.
Go,
please.
Cheryl.
No,
Go.
y'all
No.
go.
Go.
I was just going to say the other thing was I always thought that was like a photo op to let everybody know we got him. And of course, he had the black eye. So it was a little bit of street justice as well. But I thought in the beginning, college age, when I was really into it, to me, it was one of those things where we're going to show y'all we have not hurt him, that he's going to talk on his own, that, he hasn't been threatened or, damaged in any way is what I thought at that point.
Well, I think there is a history in this country of allowing people that are arrested for very serious crimes talk a bit to the media. John Dillinger had his own gaggle of press around him, uncuffed with the people that caught. I mean, it was crazy times in certain ways. But I think for me, what really piqued my curiosity was the Zapruder film and the last shot. What appears to be, it appears to non-experts, and I'm not a ballistics expert, as though it was a front shot, a shot from in front of him off to the right. It appears that way based upon the physiology of, or the physics of his body movement after being hit back and to the left, not to quote the movie, but, and then falling into Mrs. Kennedy's arms, and the pieces of his skull or brain going onto the back of the car. That appears to be a front shot. To me, that was pretty definitive. I'm not an expert, but to me, it was pretty, and it really piqued my curiosity. Is there more here? So, let's go back to what happens. Oswald is up there. The three shots that we know of are fired. The weapon is left. He comes downstairs. On his way out, he's seen getting a Coca-Cola, I believe, from a vending machine by the first Dallas cop to run into the building, who sees him and doesn't do anything because this guy's on like the second floor at this point, or the third floor as opposed to the sixth. He goes running upstairs. Oswald comes out and he jumps into a bus. He wants to get out. He wants to go home. He gets on the bus. The bus can't move because Dealey Plaza is a mess. Traffic has screwed everything up. But, he gets out and jumps into a cab. He goes home. He takes his pistol. He goes out of his house. He finds himself wandering the streets, very concerned about being recognized. Apparently, the Dallas police had put out some alerts about an individual matching his description. Somebody said they may have saw him in the window. There's so many elements of this, so many witness pieces, but he walks in without paying to a movie theater to watch a Van Heflin movie, a war movie, where this is after, actually, he's confronted first as he's walking by Dallas police officer J.D. Tippett, based upon his matching of a description of an individual wanted for questioning in connection with the shooting of the president. And he shoots and kills J.D. Tippett, which does nothing to help him look innocent, to say the least. And then he runs into the movie theater where the Dallas police get calls that individuals in there who are suspicious, and they approach him, and he tries to pull the gun, and he punches one of the officers, and he gets in turn the black eye. And then he's brought in, and at first he's just arrested for shooting J.D. Tippett. But it seems to me that the press kind of had more of an inkling on that because they converged on this right away. At what point was it put together that this knucklehead that shot the cop was the same guy from the Texas School Book Depository? I don't know. I mean, I haven't read the Warren Commission report. Most Americans haven't, so I can't comment necessarily on the factualness of it or the elements of it. I won't, but I will
Well,
say
I can
that
tell
it
you a little
just
bit.
seems weird. Go ahead, please.
So here's what they did. They started taking attendance of everybody at the school book. There's only 2 people missing. One was a gentleman that left, but he came back. He was afraid and got caught up in some of the traffic, and he couldn't because he ran at first. You know how you do. And when he came back, they were like, "Okay, you're accounted for." The other one, Lee Harvey Oswald. So as they're checking, they're like, "Wait, we got this guy." So it was very, very fast. So they had him for this incident, but then he's supposed to be here. He's not here. And y'all caught him for shooting an officer? I mean, 1 and 1 is 2 all day.
So a very quick canvas of the building turned that up, which is a real good investigative technique in the
Yep.
midst of that chaos, right?
Yes.
So now
Unbelievable.
bullets are flying in Dealey Plaza. There's numerous witnesses out there watching it. Some of them have become famous because of where they were. There's a gentleman and his wife and their 2 children who were right there where the car was, and they're seen famously on the videos laying down, covering their children. And they gave statements after the fact. They thought over 40 witnesses on Dealey Plaza thought one shot came from by the underpass. So that can't be discounted, although I will admit, and I think we all know, eyewitness testimony is notoriously questionable or unreliable at times. Human
Yeah,
beings don't always see
it
things.
is, and
But
also, the reverberation of gunshots. I mean, when you have buildings and sounds of bouncing off, it's very difficult to tell where it came from. I mean, we've probably all experienced that just in hearing gunshots go off, and it takes a minute to kind of figure out. And usually, you need to have another gunshot in order to really pinpoint because the sound just bounces. So that could have been been part of hey, we think it may have come from over here, but that's very difficult to ascertain in that shorter period of time.
Well, there's a famous picture that proves what you're saying. When the gentlemen are on the balcony after Dr. King is shot, they're all pointing over here. Well, we know that's not where he
Sure,
was. James Earl Ray was over there, but that's where they thought it came from because of the
sure,
sound.
sure.
Makes perfect
Yeah,
sense. Yep.
absolutely.
And then there's the fact, the fear factor. It's just a loud noise and you don't know where it came from.
Sure. Yeah, I mean the shooting itself it was just a matter of seconds, and it was pretty much all over. So there wasn't a lot of time to kind of just hone in on exactly what happened because it was very, very quickly. And of course, as you all know, we have this is a moving crime scene. It's not a stationary one. It goes all the way from Dealey Plaza all the way to the hospital. That's potentially your crime scene. So it was a difficult and very chaotic situation to deal with. And so I do credit them for honing in quickly on the suspect on this particular case, given the chaotic situation that they had. I can only imagine the radio traffic, and it was just horrendous. And there was some talk about the Secret Service and what our role was, and but you have to remember that the typical homicide scene, you have time to secure the scene. You bring in the right people, and you do all you have a protocol, but the Secret Service at that time had a new president to protect. They didn't have any idea the extent of this attack. Were there more people involved in it? What else did they need to do? Was this were the Russians behind? Who knows? I mean, all of these things were possibilities. They just didn't know. So sometimes, you hear some of the critiques. Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? You have to remember that in the time in which it happened, and they still had a job to do to protect people and the new president. So they didn't have time to process the scene and just write down their statements and gather evidence and that type of thing. Because again, it was just a moving, dynamic scene at that time.
Well, that was going to be, I mean, you brought it up, just my next question was going to be to you exactly what you just stated. Worst case scenario, the president of the United States gets shot and killed. Who and how is that crime scene getting done? Who's in charge? Who's calling the shots? Who's listening to who? Who's responsible for what? Now, I'm going to take you, Steve, just throw yourself back in 1963, not 2023.
Yeah.
How in the hell does that all come about?
Well, you just said it right there. It's just an incredible dynamic situation. So think about this. You have the Secret Service, you have Dallas Police, and there are other entities there. There other people involved in the security of it. You have staffers. You just have a whole gaggle of people. There's the military, obviously, they're part of it. The White House communications. I mean, we just have a whole gaggle of people. Every time the president moves, he needs to be able to do everything that he can do from the White House on the road. So just imagine how many people are there. Just that alone causes mass confusion. People have radios, police have radios, they're on fire. People are calling in different things. I could imagine people just flooded Dallas PD with, you know, either questions or wanting to know what was going on. And so that is just a very confusing situation to begin with. And it's just something that I hope I never have to deal with it, but that's what they were facing at that time. And as I mentioned, they had no idea what the extent of this attack was. Was it just a lone gunman? Were there more people involved? Were they going to be hit, later on in the day? None of this was known at that particular time. And so, again, they had a job to do. They had to keep the new president alive. They had to get out of that kill zone because again they didn't know what else was going on. They had to get back to Washington D.C. So I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for everybody involved in that, and even the local police, because again, this is the president of the United States was just shot and murdered in your city. I could only imagine what they had to go through. So when you think back to all of the criticisms, I just have I just say that it was just that type of situation that it just made it difficult for them to really kind of do what would normally be done in the situation if you had a homicide, and that was just not going to happen in that particular day.
So, a couple of thoughts on that really quickly. First of all, the top cop in the country, the one who could be called upon to make decisions of jurisdictional, was the president's brother, the attorney general. He was rushed to Parkland, I believe, and he was there to help comfort Jackie. And I don't know how he got there, but my understanding, he was moved very quickly to the scene. Now he's there. He's focused on a lot of things, but not the least of which is his role as AG. But this is his brother. This is not So there is a lot of other people jumping in, and everybody's throwing in their 2 cents, as will happen in any chaotic situation, right? But let's go back to the evidence. You talked about the crime scene. It's a rolling crime scene. There's two crime scenes actually. You have the shooter's lair up on the sixth floor, where the rifle is found, and then you have the car, and maybe you have whatever shells or any evidence that may have gone outside of the car and been recovered. And I'm not certain about that. Cheryl, what do you know about that?
Well, that's what I was going to say. If it could have happened this way, I want that car. Now, the other crime scene is literally the president's body, which we're not going to get. We're just going to get information later, but I would want that vehicle. But remember, they flew that there. And so they're probably going to want to take it right back with them. So I know one of the FBI agents that was able to go and look at the vehicle first, he describes that Miss Conley and Miss Kennedy had been given flowers, bouquet of flowers. Miss Kennedy's was yellow roses. Miss Connolly had, red roses. And he gets completely choked up when he's talking. And he said those petals were just all over the car. They were just everywhere. So that tells you the chaos inside the vehicle. Now, we already know about Miss Kennedy, but after the fact, when they go under that bridge and we can't see them anymore, that is continuing to be chaotic. When they get to the hospital, it is still chaotic. And now, just like Steve was saying, at this moment, we have got to make a decision. We've got to swear somebody else in. So you're talking about LBJ became president within an hour and a half. An hour and a half. And like Steve said, you go at noon, you have one boss. At 1:30, you have another. And it's happening just like that. So when he's sworn in, the famous shot with Jackie wearing that pink Chanel suit covered in blood, and they asked her, don't you want to change clothes? And she said, no, let them see what they've done.
And that's a great point because we at that particular time you have to think about we have a homicide, we have the death of the president, but what was more important to the country at that time was the continuity of our government. We cannot be without a president. So there was a lot of discussion. Hey, we need to get the new president sworn in because we can't have this situation where we have no president. So that was a big part of it, and they wound up getting a local judge to come out and they swore him in on the plane. Just our big thing was continuity of government, and we wanted to make sure that was accomplished and that was accomplished safely, and we were able to do that. So as maybe as cruel as it may seem, the president's dead, and that's not going to change. But we need to carry on. The government needs to carry on, and so a lot of our efforts were geared towards making that happen, and getting the new president, sworn in, and making sure that happened safely, and then getting him to a safe location. So that was a big part of it too. So when you think about, well, why didn't forensically, do this and do that? But there were other factors in play here that were extremely important. That side of the house kind of just got. As a matter of fact, there were arguments between the local authorities because this is a homicide on their scene. They wanted to keep the body, and that was just not going to happen, and it didn't happen. So yeah, there was a lot of
And
issues
here's
with the
the,
forensic stuff, but think about the time in which
yeah.
it happened and the need for the country to move forward and have a new president right away.
So, in an unstable world, the United States government has got to show that it has mechanisms in place to maintain that continuity of government. The leadership will take place regardless of how or what the reason is of death. A new president will be named as soon as we can get a judge.
That's right,
And that's what
and
happened.
that's what happened.
And, I think in retrospect, if you watch the Zapruder film, and even if you just read about it, but you can see, in my opinion, both the Dallas police and the Secret Service did an excellent job given what they were dealing with that day. Uh, Clint Hill, I've read Jackie and Mrs. Kennedy and Me, his book. I'm a big fan of him because he makes himself available to the media, but he demonstrated the very best of what you could expect from somebody in his position that day. He, at no concern for his own safety, threw himself up onto the back of a moving car to save the first lady from being horribly hurt and killed off the back of a car moving.
And
They
he's
immediately picked up the pace and roared to Parkland Hospital as per the plan. And you guys showed what you can do that day, and then you had the foresight to think in terms of, we've got to get the new president sworn in, we've got to get him back to Washington. We've got to show the world that the US government is intact. And that's a tough responsibility. I'm sorry, who's going to
No,
go,
no,
Tom?
no. No, that's a great point. And all I was going to say was, you think about what you just said, Dan, to start your statement off, that Dallas PD and the Secret Service did a phenomenal job. And again, remove yourself from 2023. No cell phones, no, 24-hour news cycle, no way to communicate with the crime scene, to the hospital, to Air Force One, to DC. and they still got it all done the way they did. Uh,
That
Phenomenal
was a
job.
tough day
And
for us
Daniel, right,
because
to secure
and
all the
I
areas that they
thank you
did.
for saying that the Secret Service did what they could, but it was a tough day for us because we lost on that particular day. There's just no way of sugarcoating that. We have a zero fail mission. That's what we have. But it just goes back to what I mentioned earlier when we started, is that balance of trying to allow the people of America to see their leaders, and embrace their leaders and talk with them and have them out among the public versus the safety. Now, we always said, hey, we can keep the president 100% safe. We just never let him out of the White House, but that's just not going to happen. So what we try to do is minimize the risk, but it can never be zero. It will never be zero. And along the way, along the years, we've realized what we need to do to get better at our jobs. And that was a painful lesson and we've changed. Obviously, there's a lot of measures that came out of that, security measures. Some of them I can't discuss, but there was security measures that came out of that assassination that we've learned from. And it's a constant learning process, and it's just a situation where you do everything you can to minimize the risk. But as I mentioned, it can never be zero.
Hey everyone, Tom and Dan here to talk about Bone Frog Coffee. Tim Cruikshank is a retired U.S. Navy SEAL who's defended this nation around the world during the most dangerous of times. When Tim retired after 25 years, he wanted to give back to the very community he served. So Tim founded and developed Bone Frog Coffee Company for the specific reason to assist the naval special warfare community and the families of Navy SEALs by giving back 10% of all the proceeds that Bone Frog Coffee brings in.
During my day, and especially when we do the show, I drink Bone Frog coffee. It's all that I drink. I really love the Zen Frog decaf. Bone Frog has incredible sample packs, the perfect way to try all the amazing Bone Frog blends. Sample packs are 4-ounce samples of all 6 blends. And when you use our exclusive promo code Gold Shields, you get an additional 10% off individual orders and 15% off a subscription order. They have an iconic roaster, Dave Stewart, who has for 50 years developed a mastership of roasting, and he helps create their blends. He mentors and he roasts coffee for Bone Frog. They source their beans from the best fields in the world of Central and South America.
So make sure you go to bonefrogcoffee.com/goldshields and use our promo code goldshields. Look for their new blend, Red, White, and Brew, their sample packs. You can order whole beans or ground, whichever you like, and K-cups. Make sure you get 4 bags for the entire month of coffees for one flat shipping rate. And not to mention their incredible merchandise of t-shirts, polos, coffee mugs, shot glasses, and their great hats.
So go right now to bonefrogcoffee.com/goldshields and get 10% off your first order and also 15% off your Bone Frog Coffee subscription. Just enter Gold Shields at checkout. That's bonefrogcoffee.com/goldshields.
That's a powerful statement to me. That got me, Steve.
Cheryl,
it'll never be zero. My
No.
Lord.
I'm going to ask you a question, Cheryl, because you are the crime scene probably guru on this call. Nothing against the rest of us, but you have the chops, so to speak, to answer this one. Much has been made of the magic bullet found on Governor Connolly's gurney. And Steve, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but what are your impressions of what the Warren Commission said with regards to the movement of that bullet? Does that sound plausible to you? You probably know a lot more about ballistics and and paths of bullets than I do.
Trajectory is a real thing. Ricochet is a real thing. And you can't ever predict. My dad used to even tell us when we'd go target practice, soon as that bullet leaves that gun, you got no control. And it's true. So again, I want that car first. To your point, is there any injury on that front windshield at all? If so, what direction? Was it from the rear of that vehicle or the front? Did something skim the top. So if there was a second shooter from another direction, can we see that? Is there any injury to any of the seats? I know one bullet went all the way through and was embedded in Governor Connolly's seat. Okay, does that check out with what would have been happening from the 6th floor? Great. Again, the injuries to the president, if you've got an entry wound and an exit wound, the exit wound's going to be bigger. We know that. We all know that. In the early years, there were some people that were really confused. They thought this has to be the entrance because it's big, and they were thinking that that's what would happen. And that little bitty mark in the back just didn't make any sense to them, but it does to us. So again, I want the car first. After that, I want to know, what does the president's body look like all over it? I need Governor Connolly. How tall is he? Where was his elbow? Did he have his arm up? Was his arm down? The Zapruder film to me is going to be a money tree. It's going to show me exactly what I need to see, which is a gift. You don't always have that. But we had 3 live victims. And I'll blow your mind about one thing. And Steve, you can jump in on this. At the time, shooting the president was not a federal offense. So that's the reason when they got Oswald, it was all Dallas PD. How crazy is that? So people were making decisions. We're out of here. Get him. We're gone. We're taking him back home. Get the car. We're gone. But, they didn't have what they needed, I don't think, at the time. And it should have stayed there. They should have, of course, if we could do it now, but they could have used string and all that. But that's what you would like to see.
Sure.
You would like to see
Well,
start to
to your
finish.
point, Cheryl, and I think you're 100% right. But as we discussed, this was not the normal homicide that we would deal with. This was the president of the United States,
100%.
and there were
100%.
political decisions, there were national security decisions. All of that played into this, and it was, hey, we'll find out what happened later, but we're not going to be worried about this forensics. We're not going to be worried about this. But the president left Washington, went to Dallas. He's going to come back to Washington. End of story. So there was more to this than just thinking of it as what we're talking about today is a crime scene and the ballistics and the forensics part of it, which is important. But there were definitely political decisions being made here and national security decisions as well. So that made this thing, different. But getting to your point about the magic bullet, bullets can do some crazy things, and I think Dan, Tommy, and Cheryl, I think you will all agree with that. And I just referenced the attempted assassination of President Reagan. It was 22 rounds he fired out of a handgun, and one of the rounds struck the limo and flattened out and skidded right along the limo. And as Jerry Parr and Ray Shattuck, the 2 Secret Service agents, were throwing the president in the limo, right between that door, the door frame and the door, that flattened round that went right along the limo, snuck right in there and hit the president in the side and almost killed him. If you tried to replicate that shot, you would never, ever be able to
Never.
do it, ever.
100%.
But
Yep.
on that particular
Yep.
day, that's what happened. And as Cheryl said, bullets can do some crazy things once they get out and they start hitting things and they tumble and everything happens. Of course, the ammunition back then it's not what we have today, which is the hollow point stuff, which hits you, expands, doesn't travel through. But that type of ball ammunition can just really do some crazy things.
And it doesn't take a lot. I mean, I usually, when I teach at the academy, I will tell people, if you watch football and that quarterback lets it loose and it's a tight spiral, if somebody just gets their finger on it, that ball can go in wild, crazy directions, start spinning crazy. Oh, the bullet's the same way. It doesn't have to hit anything real solid to make a tremendous difference in that pattern.
No, for sure.
I think part of the and remember, the term conspiracy theory, as it's thrown around on every aspect of society today, started with the Kennedy assassination. That term started with this death. And I think the magic bullet, in my mind, in my opinion, gets to a level of that kind of crazy theories that are out there, I think, because of the way it was found. If it was pulled out of Connolly's thigh and then analyzed, I think the quote unquote magic bullet there would be diminished a little bit. I think it started to really get ramped because of someone just finding it on a gurney in the hallway, while all that craziness is going on at Parkland. Uh, and then them explaining, well, this is it and this is how it happened. And now you go back to the Zapruder film, as I said, that one piece of evidence that no one, saw coming, and then you get into the sequence of shots, and one of the shots, or the bullet, shatters Governor Connolly's wrist. But if you watch the sequence of the Zapruder film, when that shot happens, that is supposedly the magic bullet, Connolly is still holding his Stetson, which you're not doing with, a shattered wrist. So that's what I mean. That's when, more and more stuff pop up, which feeds into the conspiracy theory plot, so to say.
Well, that conspiracy thing started, right from day one when people saw Jack Ruby assassinate. Also, I mean, that like this. There's got to be more. I mean, this club owner from Dallas walks in there and just takes this guy out. How can that happen? So yeah, the conspiracy theory started from day one, and we're still dealing with it today. And I think that the problem is that this case has become so convoluted. There's been so many. There's been two congressional investigations, and the last House Select Committee on Assassinations was in the late '70s. Um, so there's just been. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of pages of documents and evidence. And I was going to ask you, Cheryl, could you imagine being given this as a cold case? And yeah, and told to, there's a warehouse full of documents, and it just becomes,
Whew,
and over the years, with so many,
sure.
but the thing about it is that a lot of these stories have some credibility to them. You just like,
Of
it's just like,
course.
wow, well,
Of
that's a
course.
possibility, and it's been everything from organized crime, because they were angry with Bobby Kennedy.
Sam Giancana.
Sure, to
Yep.
to anti-Castro groups that were mad about the Bay of Pigs, and then it all went to. I read a book where LBJ was thought to be behind it, and that was compelling when you start looking at all the facts that were brought out there. But there's just been so much. It would just at this point, 60 years later, to try to go through all that and find the truth in this voluminous amount of information is just so difficult.
And there's also just enough quirky stuff to fuel that. Like, for example, when you look at Dealey Plaza, much has been made of the Umbrella Man. There was two individuals on the Texas School Book Depository side of the street, right where the first rounds or the second set of rounds came in, and one of them's holding a dark umbrella, black umbrella. Now, it was a beautiful day in Texas that day. No one else anywhere had an umbrella out. He had it out, and apparently he was putting it up and down at that moment when the shots went off, which is very weird. Coincidental, maybe, maybe not. There's an individual next to him, is known as the dark complected individual, who's an African American male, allegedly seen using an old school sort of portable radio with an antenna right after the shooting. And then immediately after the shooting, when everybody else is running towards the grassy knoll or hitting the ground, these two just sat at the curb, which was viewed as very weird too. It may have been totally nothing, but it was enough, right? It's enough. Like, what was that all about? Uh, so there was plenty of that kind of stuff floating around. I guess there always
There
will be,
always will
right?
be in those types of cases because there are just so many rabbit holes. When you have a case of that national prominence, well, you guys know when you have a national case, the phones ring off the hook. I remember when I participated in the DC sniper investigation, and that was just crazy. Um, we were pulling over white vans because someone had seen a white van leave one of the scenes of one of the murders. So, um, but as it turns out, it had nothing to do. There was no white van involved in any of this, and we thought initially that it might be terrorist activity uh, because we couldn't pin these people down. It was just crazy, and so we really thought this is a national. There's going to be more of these events across the country because soft targets are we're really vulnerable. And it turned out it was a disgruntled guy and a kid with one rifle that basically held the entire region as hostage, and it was just a tough time. So, but going back to what I was saying is, there was so many leads that came in, so many rabbit holes to go down, and they had teams of investigators, tracking down every possibility, uh, because the phones were ringing off the hook. Just that alone would just keep you busy. So you think about back in 1963, how it must have been for them. I would just imagine that the FBI was probably getting calls from everybody about, hey, this is my quirky neighbor or whatever, and everything needed to be run down. So just think of trying to manage all of that. It's just, so you're going to have things that are just left out. I mean, I don't know of any major investigation where everything was buttoned down. It's always going to be holes.
And when I taught college, I did a class literally on conspiracy theories because sometimes they're more interesting and it forces the students, they will look for any little clue, any little fact that pushes their direction. So they learn all about these cases, but that's their motivation. But if this were literally our case, you have to look at LBJ because my big thing is, how do you become president without having to run? I mean, he didn't have to run. He was just president. So you would have to look at him, right? He benefited the most out of this gig. And then you look at, well, who else became president without running? Gerald Ford. Okay, you may not see any connection. And then you go, wait a minute. Ford didn't have to run either because Nixon was thrown out, right? Ford was on the Warren Commission.
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
there are some, there's a lot of compelling, I guess, avenues to explore. In this case, brought out every single one of them, I think. But as an investigator, and I think you all back me up, is that we deal in facts and we deal with evidence, and because that's what you have. And yes, and a lot of these stories are, they're very interesting, all these different rabbit holes. But at the end of the day, is it evidence? Is it factual, or is it just supposition? So there was a lot of that going on in this particular case, and it's like you said, it's still going on today. There's people that just can't believe that it just could be one guy with a rifle that could have done this. It's hard to believe.
And it gets stirred back
Sure.
up. So when we had the assassination of Dr. King, so much mirrored that people are like, wait a minute, the government is involved, because you've got two lone gunmen, you've got a long rifle, they're standing in a building from a distance, they're surrounded by people that are supposed to protect them. Both have a partial palm print. I mean, it gets people a little freaked out. So, I mean, who is going to go through all this planning? I mean, y'all talked about it earlier, Dan, the planning that it went into it, and he left the rifle there. Come on. And then James Earl Ray left the rifle there. It doesn't make sense to people. But again, for my students, what I pushed was go with that. And what they would do, they would spend weeks and weeks, but they would learn all these facts. And then it became so important that now you know more than the general public. You know that Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. You know that MLK's mama was assassinated inside the church. And most people don't know that. But that's important. Both of these families suffered an additional murder.
Well, Martin Luther King was attacked and stabbed once in Harlem, I believe, in a church at a presentation he was giving. I mean, there's people out there that do this. There are lots of them. I mean,
That's what they do.
in
Yep.
your career with the Secret Service, Steve, nobody knows it like you guys do.
You know,
You deal with this stuff all the time.
Oh, absolutely. There's not a single day that goes by where the president isn't threatened. Every president, every single that just is a routine thing. And so, we go out and investigate. And I've traveled overseas in Central America, South America, tracking down these types of people. And I mentioned I was a polygraph guy, so they'd send me in to interrogate these people. So yeah, and does this person have the means, the ability to carry it out? So we'd have to make those determinations. But as far as the threats come in, it's nonstop. And some of them, are mentally ill. Some of them have got, some motives, and history has shown there are some that will actually go and carry it out. And it's very difficult because there's no profile of an assassin. I mean, we've had they've been young, they've been grandmothers. Sarah Jane Moore was a grandmother when she shot at President Ford. Some were not so well off, financially. Some were better, so there was just really no way to say, hey, this person is an assassin. That there is no profile. It just covers the whole gambit of people. And so yeah, it's an everyday occurrence, and you have to determine who's the real thing, and who's just blowing off steam or just getting angry or what have you. And sometimes it's difficult.
Right. And
And
that's what
Dan and Tom, I know y'all after 9/11, y'all fall in the same category as Steve. Y'all had to be perfect. It couldn't happen again. So y'all had to run everything down. I mean, Steve, y'all have to be perfect every day. Tom, Dan, it has not happened again. Y'all have been perfect every day. And I don't think people understand.
Yeah, it is a zero lose. You can't lose. There's something to be said for these sorts of events do trigger other people who all of a sudden want to jump on the bandwagon of and get their piece of notoriety. Like the day of 9/11 itself that morning, not to get into it too much, but typically New York City averaged 5, 6, maybe 7 bomb threats a day in New York City back in 2001. Now, that sounds like a lot, but most of them are just they're all hoaxes. Rarely do you recover a device, and usually it's not a bomb. It's somebody to mess with somebody, get out of school early, whatever. But they all have to get checked out. That day, but from the time the first tower was hit till the time the second tower had fallen, 102 minutes, we had about 136 bomb threats called in because people come out of the woodwork. And then you talk about conspiracies, Tom. You're going to back me up on this one. I know. I don't think that 6 months of my life has passed by since then where somebody hasn't said to me, "Isn't it true the government took those buildings down?" I really believe that. I belong to a group, and we talk about it, and people love conspiracies. They love it.
yeah. And you
Absolutely.
know what?
Because they're
Going
much,
back to
as Cheryl alluded to, they're much more interesting. Just a single gunman doing something, there's no, okay, it's a horrific act, but having this being part of a bigger story is much more compelling and interesting to people. And that's just a fact. That's just human nature. Yeah.
And you know what? I think that would be a little avoided. Facts facts are facts, and you can't let, the conspiracy get in the way of facts. And I think people would have a more inline thinking if you really looked at the facts of Oswald's background, and what he was capable of doing because of the things that he did. And they're all facts. They're all factual, going to Russia, denouncing his US citizenship, doing A, B, and C, Mexico City, and meeting with the KGB before the assassination. But that's boring. Or you take that fact and you make it into something else, to perpetuate a more, like Dan said,
He was working for the CIA.
right,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, which
Yeah.
everyone does, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, who was in charge of the CIA at the time?
Dulles. Dulles.
And wasn't Bush involved at that time
He
during the assassination?
he was in
And he
the
was from
agency. Yeah,
Dallas?
the director of the CIA was Dulles, and that was another, again, not going down rabbit holes, and we don't want to do that, but that was another, theory and conspiracy theory that came up that, Kennedy wanted to do away with the CIA. He wanted to dismantle it, right before the assassination. So of course that gets brought up.
But that's what I'm saying. That's a sexier story.
All right.
Now we're talking
Absolutely
about,
right.
wait,
Sure.
Yep.
Dulles was involved. They named the airport after him. Now Bush might have been involved, and he and his son became president. I mean, it never stopped.
You have
Yeah. I don't.
the conspiracies can go on forever, but you have. I don't think Congress helped. And for I don't read that, but in 1979 when they came out with the House Select Committee on the assassination, and they came out and said that it is likely this was a conspiracy, although they couldn't name who the conspirators were.
Right. Right.
That fueled a lot of people, and then stories have come out about Sam Giancana and Joe Kennedy, the president's father who made his money through bootlegging, and who allegedly, according to things that have come out, gave a princely sum of money to Sam Giancana to ensure the Union vote for his son. Now, if that's true, then Sam Giancana and Mafia would probably feel pretty secure continuing their, under the table sort of operations. And then all of a sudden, Bobby Kennedy picks his head up and says, I'm going after this thing called La Cosa Nostra. And so there's a motivation, right? I mean,
Well, if you're the president of the United States, there's probably a bunch of people,
oh,
that would,
yeah, yeah,
whether it's foreign leaders or, I mean, you're just gonna make some enemies, So I tend to just kind of be pragmatic, and I'm an evidence type of guy, and so although those stories are interesting, I mean, you mentioned the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and they basically did say that. It was kind of interesting because they said that um, that organized crime as a group, they were not involved. However, individual members could have been, which struck me as very funny because I don't know if organized crime would ever do this as a group. Would they
yeah.
like, let's get all five families in New York and across, and then we get the others across the country, and we'll decide this as a group. It's always going to be individual members, and the same thing with the anti-Castro group. Would they have done this as a group? No, it would have been a select few people and very few people if you don't want this information to get out there. So their wording kind of just threw me off a bit, that individuals could have done it, but not the group. They said, I don't know that they would ever do it as a group. But that was their finding. And I think to your point, Dan, it just led, just kept this thing going. They didn't put the Band-Aid on anything. They just, this is now even more of a conspiracy because they're basically saying that, there's a high probability that it was a conspiracy. And I think they based that primarily on the acoustics evidence that came out. Of course, we didn't have that back in the day, but they've been able to reproduce that. But even then, there have been experts that said, maybe, it's not really definitive. So you can bring in, that you can bring in experts to say whatever you want them to say. I mean, that's so you have to kind of even take that with a grain of salt as well. But
And this is a trained person. He was a Marine. So re-engaging that weapon, perhaps he could do it. I mean, I'm certain he practiced. I mean, this is not something he just decided the day before to do. I mean, he was in the Marine Corps. We know he was proficient. So
and then
I
and
don't
this
know.
is and so you have two basic congressional committees, the Warren Commission, and then and the later one that basically said, there were shots fired, three shots fired out of that building, and two of them struck the president, and that's their conclusion. Even the last one was basically that's what they said. Now they
Yeah, they
said that
reinforced
it could
much of it.
be another person involved because of the acoustics, but again, I looked at that acoustics information, and I'm not an expert at it, but again, it didn't. It wasn't like they had all the acoustic experts in the country all lined up and they all agreed, yeah, this is what happened. So even with expert opinions, it leaves the door open.
No, I agree with that, and I think if I'm remembering correctly, the acoustic report and the analytics that were done in that were taken from a motorcycle radio that just happened to be keyed at the time. So you had everything, I mean, a circus atmosphere around that area that you're trying to pinpoint, 3 distinct shots. Very difficult to do, especially like you said back then.
Well, I read somewhere about that specific highway or motorcycle cops radio being open that may have not even been at Dealey Plaza because apparently there's no other real background noise like you would have heard the people shrieking. So that's an oddity about that as well. The Zapruder film brings up a good point for people though too, because that film itself, he ultimately sold it to I think it was Life magazine, but the FBI, I believe, took control of it initially, and the public didn't see it until Jim Garrison, the New Orleans DA, what is it, Clay Bertrand, he put on trial in 1966 for his alleged participation in this, and he showed it during the trial. And that's when the public learned about it and had access to it for the first time, which fuels conspiracy. They didn't want us to see it. See?
No, I agree. I agree 100%. Um, because think about, I mean, if you think about at the time, the Cold War was going on, and there were people that thought that, this Russia's behind this. I mean, you could potentially see, how this could snowball into an international incident. And, so people were already inflamed. And then imagine showing that to the American people in 1963, showing that graphic, headshot. I mean, that was something that would just overwhelm people, and I didn't think America was ready for it. And they were trying to calm people at that particular time frame, not incite them, and put pressure on the government to to deal with this, because the Cubans could have been involved, the Russians could have been involved. I mean, it just went on and on. So they had a different mission back then. It was just to kind of calm the nation. So I don't, yeah. So I understand why they didn't do it, but yet it was shocking when people finally did see it.
Yeah, and believe it or not, the first public, I mean, this is gonna of all people to do this, the very first public release of that was done on Geraldo Rivera's show on Channel 7. It was called, like, New York Nightline or something like that, was the first time that it got released to the United States public on his show, and it was like a bootleg copy of it that someone made or copied or something and gave to him. So, I don't wanna give Geraldo too much credit, but that's a whole 'nother deal.
And there is a second video. A gentleman named Orville Nix shot from the other side of Dealey Plaza. That's a less famous video because it shows less close-up detail, but that was the second known video that I became aware of as well. But fascinating, fascinating. Final thoughts, Cheryl. If you had this case when you were there, is there anything you think you might have done slightly differently? Not thinking today's technology, but just gumshoe detective work. It sounds like
Again,
they.
I want somebody the president's height. I want somebody Miss Kennedy's height, the driver, the Conleys. I want to recreate that car. I want to put rods. I want string. I want to see it. Where did this come from? How can we prove and see it, from the damage to the bodies to the damage to the vehicle? I would want a visual of that so I can articulate it and explain with certainty there was one shooter or possibly two.
Yeah, I would echo what Cheryl just said. If you can go back and have the luxury of doing those types of things that you would normally do in a homicide investigation, yeah, I would want to do all those types of things as well. So I echo that. Um, but again, that's just not something that we're ever going to be able to do. So we have to deal with the evidence that we have at hand. And me personally, I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was responsible for the death of President Kennedy, but I leave open the door that there could have been others that were involved in it as well. But that's as far as it that I can take it, because again, it's just the case is just so convoluted, and you had, again, as you mentioned, Jim Garrison taking having that trial, and that opened up a whole another avenue of another group of people. But just to show you how difficult it can be after all these years. I mean, just think about the Jimmy Hoffa case and all that went happen and everything that happened there over the years. I mean, if somebody came forward now and said that they killed Jimmy Hoffa, we would just say, "Yeah, get in the back of the
Yeah,
line
right.
Yeah,
with everybody else,"
You're
because
right.
we've been through this before. So, I mean, a guy could say, "No,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
really did it. It
before.
was me. It was me." Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah,
whatever. Because there's just been
right.
so much, so many avenues, so many information. Everybody and his brother claimed to have information about it. So when if you think about a case
Such a
becoming
good point.
overwhelming, that's what happens. You get tons of. I just remember my brothers and sisters at the FBI, and they're digging in someplace in Pennsylvania, and I'm like, now, if I'm an organized crime guy and I'm taking this guy out in
Yeah.
Detroit, why would I want to transport him halfway across the country?
All the way,
What,
right.
there's no smelters in
Yeah.
Detroit. I mean, you can't get rid of a
No,
body in Detroit. I mean, so
exactly.
but that's the rabbit hole that you can get into when you have these types of national profile cases and so much pressure. You got to go after all of these different leads, even though they seem to be crazy and bizarre. I mean, how many holes did the FBI dig trying to find his body over the years? Tons of them. It was crazy. So now, again, if somebody came forward and said I did it, we'd be like, yeah, whatever.
You're
So
right. Absolutely right.
All
yeah,
right.
crazy.
Dan, what do you think? What's your final thought in this?
I'm open to learning more about it. I will admit that I've read books about it, and many of them have opinion in them, and it's hard to say for me. But I haven't read the Warren Commission report. I haven't read the House subcommittee report from the late 70s. It appears that Oswald was a shooter, if not the only shooter. It appears that there's strong evidence that a lot of people had reason and motive, but did they? I don't know. I like to hold out when I don't know. But for now, I'll take the version that's out there because I haven't seen evidence to tell me definitively, yes, somebody else fired a weapon. Yes, this is who it was. Yes, Oswald didn't act alone that day with weapon. I haven't seen that. So I've seen a lot of smoke, a lot of interesting stuff. Oliver Stone made an interesting movie. Jim Garrison brought an interesting case. I don't know. I hate to say that. My opinion is it's a heck of a mystery. Certain pieces of it we'll probably never know in our lifetime. But
Well, it's interesting that the latest document dump that President Biden signed, because he wanted to get most of this stuff out there, didn't really lend itself. People were waiting for these, thousands of documents to come out there, and they'd gone through them. And basically, what happened was it just painted Oswald as a little bit more of a complicated character, with the Russia and the Cuban and Mexican connections and stuff. But other than that, it didn't produce any lightning bolts or anything that people would just hang on to. So the latest I heard is President Biden is done with signing any more leases of information. So what we got is probably what we're ever going to have. And and again, my opinion is I think Oswald was in fact responsible for the death of the president, but that he possibly could have been working with another person, but that's unknown.
And that's mine too. I'm in the same boat. Very open to. You would love. This is You would love to just take everything you got and get everything and go through it and, just like all four of us have done more than half our lives. This is like the ultimate case to dig into. But I'm in the same boat. I think Oswald was responsible, but I do think there's other factors involved that either assisted him or someone else assisting you, something like that. But I'm in the same boat as Dan. You have to go with what you got right now, and that's what we have. You can theorize all we want. It's the best. This is the best bar conversation that'll ever happen. I mean,
Yeah,
right? I
yeah.
mean, you're at
It
a bar.
is. It is.
Well,
If someone brings this up, you're
100%.
talking about it for 3 hours.
there you go. Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
I just want to
100%.
mention one other thing because we were talking about that earlier before the show. This latest development with the Secret Service agent named Paul Landis, who's 88 years old now and came out with this book where he claims he was the one that took the bullet out of the back of the limo and put it
That's right.
on the gurney
Put it on the gurney. Yep.
of Connolly. And of course, when the bullet was found on the gurney, they just assumed that it came from Connolly. But now you have this agent
Right.
60 years later. This is the first time we're hearing it, which makes this even more bizarre. Like, why would you?
Right.
And
I mean,
I didn't even bring it up earlier because I thought that's just going to feed right
well,
into. Why did he wait so long?
It does feed into it
Yeah.
because
Right.
that's what makes
Yeah.
this
It
even
does.
more bizarre. Is that 60
Yeah.
years later, why would you have kept that information?
Why wouldn't you have said that day one and get rid of that whole thing? And you're waiting till now? I mean, come on, you got.
Yeah.
And you
You know.
think about the people who are out there that maybe do know something. They're like, "Oh hell no, I ain't saying anything now."
I'm not saying anything. Everybody's going to call me a nut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things we prided ourselves on the NYPD was we started rumors. We love to start rumors. And they gain lives of their own. They take legs, they run down the field, they do all kinds of stuff. People call
Yep.
headquarters, what's going on? We start rumors.
Sure.
And
Start rumors.
one of the rumors I would love to start, I just think it's funny, is Oswald, as he's shot, whispers to the Dallas detective, "It was the Amish."
Yeah.
Like, and have the
Yeah.
whole government turn their investigative arm on these people in Lancaster County
Yeah.
who just like to make furniture and live a simple life. You could throw anything out there and somebody's going to believe it.
Yeah, that's it. But like Sheryl said, it's much more interesting. And this story of the assassination of JFK have just occupied people's minds and in their time for decades now, and it's still something that you just go on the internet and there's all kinds of information and people chiming in, so it still holds interest to the public because everybody loves a mystery, and this is one that is still basically unsolved because Oswald was killed. He never went to trial, so I mean, based on
And
the
Steve, you're
evidence,
absolutely
yeah.
right.
So it's
Everybody loves a mystery, but everybody loves a love story. And this is both. So again, when all this is happening, And Jackie Kennedy gives that first interview after this horrible event. She's the one that said, "Don't let it be forgot. For one brief, shiny moment, there was Camelot." Who doesn't love that? Who doesn't want that to be true? Not just for her, but for our country.
Well said. Well said. So, Sheryl, while you're on a roll, tell us what you have going on, where everyone can tune into Sheryl. Now, Cheryl's going to be on our show in the beginning of the year. That's already been established. We certainly need a show for Sheryl, but
Ooh, I
just
can't wait.
let everyone know, where they can listen to Zone 7 and what you got going on.
Well, this is the season, y'all know. Between now and New Year's Eve, it's just going to be crazy for us. But I am a crime scene investigator in Metro Atlanta. I've got the podcast Zone 7, and you can listen to it anywhere that you can get a podcast. It's all over the place. And I'm on Nancy Grace pretty regularly, and I'm getting ready for Thanksgiving where I fortunately don't have to cook nothing. I've got older sisters that take care of all the hoopla, and they let the younger sister put ice in the glasses, and I'm happy. And then I'll see my, mother-in-law and, my husband's side of the family. And then my sisters, I have one that's celebrating turning 70. And my husband is a fabulous cook, so he'll be cooking as well. But I try not to tell that to everybody because my grandmother used to tell us, if you get a good man, don't you brag on him. Somebody will try to take him. So I try not to brag. Walt cooks and he's good to you and he, pays the mortgage. I don't want to tell people that.
That's awesome.
But
That's great.
I was so excited to be here. And Steve, I mean, good Lord. I mean, Sharon, any screen time with you has just been unbelievable. And Tom and Dan, y'all know how I feel about you. Rarely have anybody ever done it better. So, I mean, I hope I could add something, but I just felt like I needed to hush and listen to y'all.
Hey,
No, it
there
was
was a
great.
reason.
Yeah,
There was a reason to have you on, Sheryl, and we
absolutely.
love you, babe. Steve, what do you got going? What do we got going, buddy?
Well, I just started my own podcast, so I'm in the learning stages of it right now, called the Monteiro Report, and it's available on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. So that's just been kind of exciting, learning how to do it all. So, I'm trying to concentrate on situations of national, international security, and I think one of my next upcoming episodes is going to be on the vulnerability of our infrastructure, our critical infrastructure, which is particularly in this time frame right now, where Christopher Wray just came on, was given a statement to Congress about the threat level to the United States has just skyrocketed as a result of the October 7th attack there. So that leaves us in a quagmire. So those types of national, international type of situations, and then just provide my thoughts and opinion on it. So yeah, and I wrote that first book, The Gray Bird of Baghdad, about that mission in Iraq. So
Incredible book.
yeah, well, thank you. And people have been pressuring me to kind of crank something else out. So I'm like, yeah, okay. So anyway, yeah, so I'm toying with that idea of writing a second book. But right now I'm busy with trying to get this thing off the ground. But like you said, when we were talking off camera, Dan and Tom, that the best part of this is meeting people, and you are so right. And now I've had a chance to meet Sheryl, and that's awesome. So that's the best part of all of this, and I look forward to continuing that and meeting some really great people. And you guys are awesome as well. So you're my brothers, right?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And Cheryl's our sister. We're a family. That's what it's
That's
all
right.
about.
That's right.
Yeah. You guys are phenomenal. Tom and I can't thank you enough. We were so excited about this show because we really wanted our audience to get a chance to hear your perspectives on perhaps the most famous homicide in U.S. history. You got the Lincoln assassination. You got the Kennedy. What comes close? And you guys really, really outdid yourself. Some fascinating insights, some great opinions based upon your experience, and you're just great people. And I could listen to you all day long because I learned. So, thank you for gracing our show with your time.
Thank you.
And we'll make sure everybody knows about Zone 7 with Sheryl, the Monteiro Report with Steve, 2 podcasts you do not want to miss. Tom, brother, take us out as always.
Another phenomenal show, and we knew it was going to be when we had these two guests. There was a specific reason we picked the two of you, and this is why. It was an hour and 20 minutes of just nonstop professionalism, expertise, experience, and that's what we wanted to bring to this show. So thank you both for being here. Again, youtube.com/@goldshield, selfless plug. We got to do it. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, get all the notifications on our upcoming shows. Rumble.com/goldshields and all audio podcast platforms we're on. And we can't thank everyone out there enough for the overwhelming response we're getting, especially over the last, couple of months. It's just been off the chart. And we thank you very, very much. And Dan and I say it all the time. It's because of our great guests. Dan and I talk a little bit, have our names on it, big deal. It's our guests that we have that make this show. So we'll try to keep it going for everyone out there. And thank you for the support. As we always do, say a prayer for law enforcement officers out there, federal, state, local, all of them. They do a thankless job for no fanfare, little money, no medals. Just do it to help and be there to assist people in their lives at the worst time of their lives. And say thank you to them, give them a wave, give them a pat on the back in the store, as well as our military members. And this week, you know what? Have the Kennedy family in your prayers. This time of year when something like this happens, be it's 60 years later, it's still a memory. It still hurts, and it's still a loss. So, have them in your prayers in this coming week with this sorrowful anniversary. But for God, again, what a show. Sheryl McCollum, Steve Monteiro, my partner, Dan Murphy. This is Tom Smith again. Thank you so much for tuning in. Everyone stay safe, and we'll see everybody soon.